Rome, the Eternal City, it's more than just a name on a map. It's a profound echo in the very fabric of our modern world. A titan of history, a civilization that stretched its iron grip across continents, laying foundations in law, language, architecture, and governance that still resonate profoundly today. For well over a millennium, from its enigmatic, almost mythical beginnings as a cluster of small villages to the sprawling, masterful control of the entire Mediterranean world, Rome's story is an unparalleled saga of relentless ambition, extraordinary engineering prowess, and a cultural impact so deep it became indelible. How did such a seemingly ordinary Italian city-state rise from obscure origins to dominate such a vast, diverse, and often hostile world? What were the true secrets to its astonishing longevity, its unique ability to absorb, adapt, and ultimately transform the countless peoples and cultures it conquered? This documentary will embark on an immersive journey through time, delving deep into the remarkable forces, the pivotal moments, and the extraordinary figures that shaped the Roman Colossus, tracing its rise to an unprecedented zenith of power, and ultimately, understanding the complex transformations that led to its eventual metamorphosis. From humble beginnings, the birth of a republic and early resilience. Our sprawling story begins not with the familiar grandeur of emperors and legions, but with the whispered tales of myth and the gritty determination of early settlers. Legend tells of twin brothers, Romulus and Remus, abandoned, suckled by a she-wolf, and destined to found a city on 7 strategic hills overlooking the Tiber River in 753 BC. While the dramatic myths are endlessly captivating, the historical reality was likely a far slower, more laborious ascent. Initially established as a monarchy, ruled by a succession of kings, Rome soon transitioned, around 509 BC, to a unique political innovation, the Republic. This complex, evolving system would come to define its very character for nearly 5 centuries, shaping the Roman spirit and its approach to power. The Roman Republic was, in essence, a complex beast, a fascinating, often tumultuous experiment in governance. It was characterized by a delicate, frequently strained balance of power. At its core were the annually elected magistrates, chief among them the 2 powerful consuls, who held executive and military authority. Then there was the Senate, an assembly of elder statesmen, primarily patricians, whose wisdom and experience, though technically advisory, carried immense weight. Finally, there were the popular assemblies, allowing citizens a voice, albeit one that was often limited initially. This was a period of intense internal struggle, a grinding battle for rights and representation between the patricians, the aristocratic elite who held sway over much of the land and power, and the plebeians, the common citizens, who tirelessly fought to gain their rightful place in Roman society. This internal dynamism, far from being a weakness, actually forged Rome's resilience. Fueled by crucial legal innovations, such as the codification of the 12 Tables in 451 BC, Rome's first comprehensive written law code, displayed publicly for all to see. This struggle pushed the Republic towards greater equity. The creation of the office of the Tribune of the Plebs, individuals with sacrosanct power to veto laws that harmed common citizens, and later, the Lex Hortensia in 287 BC, which made plebiscite decisions binding on all citizens, regardless of class, underscored a society increasingly built on the evolving principles of law, order, and collective civic duty. Every citizen, no matter their perceived status, had a role to play, a contribution to make to the res publica, the public thing, a concept deeply ingrained in the Roman psyche. This early Rome was certainly not yet a world-spanning power. It was a relentless regional fighter. Constantly engaged in localized wars with its Latin neighbors, the powerful Etruscans to the north, and various hardy mountain tribes, Rome honed its martial prowess. Each conflict, each hard-won victory, however small, served to harden its nascent legions, refine its military tactics, and incrementally expand its territory across the rugged Italian peninsula. The Romans were, above all, masters of adaptation. They learned swiftly and ruthlessly from their enemies, incorporating effective military formations, advanced siege technologies, and even adopting and integrating aspects of their enemies' pantheons into their own evolving religious system. Their burgeoning genius lay not just in brute force or unyielding discipline, but crucially, in their uncanny ability to integrate conquered peoples. They offered them pathways to citizenship or shrewd alliances, thus turning what could have been perpetual enemies into loyal subjects or even integral, contributing parts of their rapidly growing confederation. This inclusive, albeit pragmatic, approach to conquest set them apart and became a cornerstone of their enduring power. The Mediterranean masters, Punic Wars, Hellenistic conquests, and global dominance. The true defining test of Rome's indomitable mettle came with the colossal challenge posed by the Carthaginian Empire. Carthage, a fabulously wealthy and powerful maritime trading empire, founded by Phoenicians and based in modern-day Tunisia, controlled vast swaths of the western Mediterranean, its naval dominance virtually unchallenged. The inevitable clash between these two emerging titans, a series of three epic conflicts known as the Punic Wars, 264 to 146 BC, would not only reshape the Mediterranean, but also forge Rome into the imperial power it was destined to become. The First Punic War, largely a naval conflict, saw Rome, traditionally a land power, rise to the challenge by rapidly building a formidable fleet. Their ingenious invention of the corvus, a heavy pivoting gangplank with a spiked hook, transformed naval battles into land engagements, negating Carthaginian naval superiority and allowing Roman legionaries to board enemy ships. This innovative adaptability secured Rome's initial victory. But the Second Punic War was where legends were truly forged. It featured the brilliant and utterly relentless Carthaginian general, Hannibal Barca. Imagine him, audacious and strategic, marching elephants over the treacherous Alps, descending into Italy itself, and bringing Rome to the very brink of utter collapse. For over a decade and a half, Hannibal terrorized the Italian peninsula, inflicting devastating defeats like the catastrophic Battle of Cannae in 216 BC, where tens of thousands of Romans fell in a single day, a blow that would have shattered any lesser state. But Rome, with its characteristic, almost superhuman resilience, refused to break. Even after such profound devastation, they regrouped, adapted their strategies, adopting the delaying, attritional Fabian strategy under Quintus Fabius Maximus, and ultimately triumphed. The tide turned with the emergence of Rome's own strategic genius, Scipio Africanus, who daringly took the war to North Africa, forcing Hannibal to return to defend Carthage. Scipio's decisive victory at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC secured Roman supremacy in the West. The Third Punic War, a bitter and ruthless coda, ended with the complete and utter destruction of Carthage in 146 BC, a grim and stark reminder of Rome's unforgiving nature towards its existential rivals. The chilling phrase, Carthago delenda est, Carthage must be destroyed, articulated by Cato the Elder, became the Roman mantra. With Carthage definitively removed from the chessboard, Rome was the undisputed, unchallenged master of the entire Western Mediterranean. But its burgeoning ambition, fueled by strategic necessity and the thirst for glory and resources, didn't stop there. Eastward lay the fabulously wealthy Hellenistic kingdoms, fragmented remnants born from the vast conquests of Alexander the Great. These kingdoms, Macedonia, the Seleucid Empire in the Near East, and Ptolemaic Egypt, were rich in culture, trade, and strategic importance. One by one, often through complex and drawn-out engagements, they fell under Roman sway. This was not always achieved through direct, brutal conquest, but frequently through cunning diplomacy, strategic alliances, the exploitation of existing internal divisions, and a gradual, almost insidious, assertion of Roman protection that often morphed into direct control. By the mid-2nd century BC, the Roman Republic had irrevocably transformed. It was no longer a regional power, but a vast, sprawling, unstoppable empire, a colossus bestriding the entire Mediterranean world, truly earning its epithet, Mare Nostrum, our sea. The Republic's unraveling, internal strife, social upheaval, and the rise of ambitious generals. This breathtakingly rapid expansion, however, came at a profound and ultimately destructive cost. The very success of the Republic, its stunning territorial gains and influx of wealth, paradoxically sowed the virulent seeds of its own demise. Vast new riches, largely derived from tribute, plunder, and conquered lands, poured into Rome, but this wealth was catastrophically unevenly distributed, creating enormous, unsustainable disparities between the immensely rich elite and the increasingly impoverished common citizens. Small farmers, who had historically formed the very backbone of the legions and the traditional Roman social structure, found their land swallowed up by massive commercially oriented estates, latifundia, worked by hundreds, sometimes thousands of cheap slaves, pouring in from conquered territories. This created a burgeoning, dispossessed urban proletariat in Rome, landless and often jobless, ripe for manipulation by ambitious politicians and generals. The military itself underwent a fundamental transformation. Once a citizen militia composed of property-owning farmers, the army became professionalized under reforms initiated by Gaius Marius in the late 2nd century BC. Soldiers now enlisted for long terms, were paid, and expected land grants upon discharge. Their loyalty inevitably shifted from the abstract concept of the state to the individual general who could ensure their retirement benefits. This change paved the way for ambitious, charismatic figures like Marius himself, his rival Sulla, the formidable Pompey the Great, and the incomparable Julius Caesar to rise to unprecedented prominence. These men wielded immense personal power, commanding fiercely loyal armies, and directly challenging the traditional authority and conservative traditions of the Senate. Their bitter rivalries, fueled by personal ambition and the desperate loyalty of their veteran legions, often exploded into brutal civil wars, tearing the very fabric of the Republic apart in a cycle of violence and proscription. Julius Caesar's story remains perhaps the most famous and pivotal example of this era. A brilliant general, a charismatic politician, and a masterful orator, he achieved unprecedented glory through his conquest of Gaul, modern-day France, in a series of devastating campaigns that solidified his military reputation and personal wealth. His subsequent defiance of the Senate, famously crossing the Rubicon River in 49 BC with his legions, an act that famously became a metaphorical point of no return, ignited a devastating civil war against Pompey and his senatorial allies. Caesar's eventual victory, which established him as the undisputed master of Rome, and his subsequent assumption of dictatorial powers, including Dictator Perpetuo, dictator for life, ultimately led to his dramatic assassination on the Ides of March in 44 BC by a conspiracy of senators fearing the final, irreversible end of the Republic. But their desperate actions, ironically intended to save the Republic, only plunged Rome into further chaos, inadvertently sealing its fate and setting the stage for an even more fundamental shift in power. The age of the Republic was, effectively, over. The dawn of empire. Augustus and the unprecedented Pax Romana. The protracted chaos and bloody civil wars that followed Caesar's assassination eventually gave way to the remarkable rise of his adopted great-nephew and heir, Octavian. Through a series of astute political maneuvers, shrewd alliances, and a final, decisive civil war against the combined forces of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, Octavian emerged as the sole, undisputed victor of a war-weary Rome. In 27 BC, in a masterstroke of political genius, he carefully consolidated his immense power. He avoided the title of king or dictator that had proved so fatal to his adoptive father, instead carefully restoring the appearance of the Republic while subtly transforming it into an autocratic empire under his singular control. He adopted the venerable title of Augustus, meaning the revered one, and became Rome's first de facto emperor, laying the foundations for a system that would endure for centuries. Augustus ushered in an unprecedented and often celebrated era of peace and immense prosperity known as the Pax Romana, the Roman peace, a period of stability that would astonishingly last for over 2 centuries. Under his shrewd and far-sighted leadership, the vast empire finally stabilized after generations of internal strife. Communication and trade flourished across its immense domain, facilitated by standardized currency and weights, and above all, by an elaborate network of well-maintained Roman roads. He meticulously reorganized the sprawling Roman army, establishing a professional standing force loyal to the emperor, reformed the taxation system, established a highly efficient professional bureaucracy to govern the vast provinces, and vigorously patronized the arts, leading to a veritable golden age of Roman literature, exemplified by poets like Virgil and Ovid, and magnificent architecture. This period was not merely one of stability, but of profound integration. It saw the consolidation of Roman power and the deep incorporation of incredibly diverse cultures under the broad Roman umbrella. The empire stretched from the rain-swept reaches of Britain in the northwest to the ancient sands of Egypt in the southeast, encompassing a staggering array of peoples, languages, religions, and local customs. While Romanization, the adoption of Roman law, Latin language, and Roman customs, was subtly but persistently encouraged through the establishment of colonies and the granting of citizenship, local customs and traditions were often tolerated and even embraced, creating a vibrant mosaic of cultures ultimately bound by the overarching framework of Roman law, governance, and indispensable infrastructure. This era of peace and prosperity truly cemented Rome's status as the paramount power of the ancient world. Engineering marvels, urban life, and the fabric of society. The Romans were not merely conquerors. They were, without question, unparalleled engineers, master builders, and visionary city planners. Their astonishing practical genius is still powerfully evident in the magnificent, awe-inspiring ruins scattered across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, standing as enduring testaments to their ambition and skill. Consider their aqueducts, monumental gravity-fed channels, constructed with an astonishing precision that brought fresh, clean water from distant mountain springs to supply the sprawling cities, feeding elaborate public baths, countless fountains, and even private homes. Structures like the towering Pont du Gard in modern-day France or the immense Aqua Claudia in Rome itself are simply breathtaking testaments to their hydrological prowess and capacity for grand public works. Their roads, true engineering masterpieces, were not merely dirt tracks. They were meticulously built with multiple layers of crushed stone, gravel, and revolutionary Roman concrete, often paved with flagstones. These arterial networks stretched for tens of thousands of miles across the empire, facilitating not only swift troop movements, but also efficient trade, rapid communication, and the smooth flow of goods and ideas. The legendary Appian Way, parts of which are remarkably still in use today, exemplifies this enduring legacy. Roman cities were vibrant, bustling, and often surprisingly clean hubs. They featured not just grand temples and civic buildings, but elaborate public baths. Massive complexes, serving as far more than just places for hygiene. They were vital social centers, gyms, places for intellectual discourse, business dealings, and relaxation. Often heated by ingenious hypocaust systems, temples dedicated to a vast, syncretic pantheon of gods adorned their forums, the public squares that formed the very heart of civic life and commerce. The iconic Colosseum, a massive amphitheater completed in 80 AD, famously hosted spectacular gladiatorial contests and elaborate public spectacles, reflecting the deep-seated Roman love for entertainment, hierarchy, and public display. Even their private homes, ranging from grand, multi-roomed villas with frescoes and courtyards to multi-story apartment blocks known as insulae for the less wealthy, demonstrated a surprising sophistication in design and comfort for their era. Their innovations extended far beyond infrastructure. Roman concrete, a truly revolutionary building material often reinforced with volcanic ash, pozzolana, allowed them to construct massive, durable structures that surpassed anything built before. This material enabled feats like the Pantheon, with its colossal, perfectly formed, and for centuries, unsurpassed, unsupported concrete dome, a feat of architectural engineering that still astounds experts today. Crucially, their legal system, a complex and evolving body of law based on fundamental principles of justice, equity, and the universal rule of law, forms the bedrock of countless modern legal codes across the globe. Concepts like innocent until proven guilty, the importance of precedent, and the idea of natural law all found their foundational roots in sophisticated Roman jurisprudence, a society of structure, spectacle, and shifting faiths. Roman society was, by modern standards, rigidly hierarchical. At its apex were the citizens, stratified into various classes from the senatorial elite down to the plebeians. Below them were non-citizens, various allied peoples, and at the very bottom, a vast population of slaves, upon whom much of Rome's economy and comfort rested. Yet, for citizens, it often offered avenues for social mobility, particularly through distinguished military service, the acquisition of wealth through commerce, or astute political maneuvering. The family, familia, was the undisputed bedrock of Roman life, with the paterfamilias, the eldest male head of the household, wielding immense legal and moral authority over all within his domain. Education, particularly for boys, was rigorous, focusing on rhetoric, law, history, and military training, preparing them for the demands of public life and service to the state. Girls were educated primarily for their roles within the household, though wealthy women often received tutors in literature and philosophy. Public life was undeniably central to Roman identity. Citizens flocked daily to the forum for political debates, important legal proceedings, and solemn religious ceremonies. Entertainment, however, was also a vital and pervasive part of Roman life. The thunderous chariot races in the Circus Maximus, a massive stadium that could hold hundreds of thousands, saw roaring crowds passionately cheering for their favorite teams and drivers. The brutal gladiatorial contests in the amphitheaters, where armed combatants fought to the death or submission, were spectacles of immense popularity and served multiple functions. They were a release valve for social tensions, a grim form of public justice, and a powerful tool for emperors to demonstrate their munificence and connect with the populace through shared excitement and spectacle. While seemingly barbaric to modern eyes, these games were deeply embedded in the Roman psyche and cultural expectations. Religion in Rome was traditionally polytheistic, featuring a vast and inclusive pantheon of gods and goddesses, largely adopted from the Greeks, but given Roman names and characteristics: Jupiter, Juno, Mars, Venus, etc. Public religious rituals, sacrifices, and festivals were woven into the very fabric of the state, ensuring the favor of the gods for Rome's prosperity and success. The cult of the emperor also became increasingly important, reinforcing loyalty to the state by venerating the living or deceased emperor as a divine figure. However, the empire was remarkably tolerant of diverse religious practices among its conquered peoples, allowing them to worship their own deities, as long as these practices did not challenge Roman authority, traditional customs, or explicitly refuse to acknowledge the state-sanctioned cults. This tolerance would later be profoundly tested by the emergence of Christianity, a radical monotheistic faith that, by its very nature, refused to acknowledge the divinity of the emperor or the traditional Roman gods, leading to periods of intense persecution for early believers. The long decline. Crises, divisions, and profound transformations. The golden age of the Pax Romana eventually, and perhaps inevitably, gave way to an era of mounting instability and profound challenge, famously known as the crisis of the 3rd century. For a tumultuous 50-year period, from 235 to 284 AD, the vast empire was racked by an almost continuous cycle of civil war, internal usurpations, and political assassinations. During this chaotic half-century, over 20 different emperors sat on the throne, many of whom met violent and premature ends at the hands of their own soldiers or rivals. Simultaneously, constant barbarian invasions intensified along the immense, overstretched borders, from Germanic tribes along the Rhine and Danube to the Sasanian Persians in the east, draining resources and manpower. Severe economic crises, including rampant inflation due to the debasement of coinage, disruption of trade routes, and crippling taxation, further destabilized the state and impoverished its citizens. This prolonged period of chaos mercilessly exposed the fundamental underlying weaknesses of the vast empire. Its immense size, once its greatest strength, now became a crushing burden rather than an asset, making it increasingly difficult to govern, defend, and administer effectively from a single center. The empire became fractured into de facto regional empires, like the Gallic Empire in the west and the Palmyrene Empire in the east. The Roman economy's heavy reliance on slave labor, while providing initial wealth, ultimately hindered technological innovation and adaptability compared to more fluid labor systems. Moreover, deep internal divisions between the increasingly distinct Latin-speaking West and the Greek-speaking East, between the privileged elite and the struggling masses, and between traditionalists and emerging Christians, widened, eroding social cohesion and political unity. The empire was eventually pulled back from the brink of total collapse by strong, determined emperors who implemented radical, often authoritarian reforms. Diocletian, who ruled from 284 to 305 AD, famously recognized the impossibility of governing such a vast realm alone and implemented the Tetrarchy, dividing the empire into east and west, each ruled by an Augustus and a Caesar, attempting to ensure smoother succession and more localized defense. Though the Tetrarchy itself ultimately failed, the administrative split persisted. Then came Constantine the Great, who, after his conversion to Christianity, not only legalized the faith across the empire, but also took the momentous step of moving the primary capital to the east, founding Constantinople, modern-day Istanbul, in 330 AD. This decisive shift, while initially bolstering the Eastern Roman Empire, inadvertently cemented the growing cultural, linguistic, and political divergence between the two halves of the Roman world, setting them on fundamentally different trajectories: the fall of the West and the enduring legacy of Rome. While the Eastern Roman Empire, often referred to as the Byzantine Empire, with its capital at Constantinople, would continue to flourish as a powerful, culturally vibrant, and economically dynamic entity for another 1,000 years, the Western Roman Empire faced increasingly insurmountable challenges. By the 5th century AD, a combination of relentless economic decline, persistent overstretched borders, endemic internal political instability, and successive waves of massive Germanic migrations often fleeing the terrifying incursions of the Huns from the east, eventually led to its fragmented collapse. The traditional symbolic date for the fall of Rome in the West is 476 AD, when the last Western Roman emperor, the young Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer. However, this was decidedly not a sudden, cataclysmic event, a single dramatic collapse. Instead, it was a protracted, gradual process, a slow, grinding transformation, where centralized Roman authority simply faded or was incrementally replaced across many regions. Imperial infrastructure crumbled, long-distance trade networks severely contracted, and literacy rates plummeted across much of Western Europe. The political landscape devolved into a patchwork of smaller, often warring Germanic kingdoms, and Europe descended into what historians, somewhat controversially, often term the Dark Ages. Yet, to declare that Rome simply fell is to fundamentally miss its enduring transformative legacy. The Roman Empire, in a profound sense, never truly died. It fundamentally transformed, adapting and evolving in new guises. Its foundational legal principles, its majestic language, Latin, which profoundly influenced all the Romance languages and became the lingua franca of medieval scholarship, its sophisticated administrative structures, and even its architectural styles lived on, deeply influencing the new Germanic kingdoms that rose from its ashes. Crucially, the nascent Christian Church, with its own hierarchical structure and widespread organization, became a key preserver of Roman learning, administrative practices, and cultural traditions throughout the medieval period, effectively becoming the inheritor of much of Rome's institutional legacy. Rome's undying echoes. From the breathtaking grandeur of its architecture to the elegant logic of its law, from the unyielding discipline of its legions to the timeless poetry of its greatest writers, Rome's influence on subsequent Western civilization, and indeed the world, is undeniable and omnipresent. We continue to see its impact in the very layout of our modern cities, in countless words we speak every day, in the fundamental concepts of justice, citizenship, and representative government that underpin our societies. The Roman genius for practical organization, for relentless adaptation, and for sheer, indomitable resilience continues to inspire, to instruct, and to provoke thought in a world millennia removed from its ancient origins. The expansive story of Rome is ultimately a testament to both the astonishing heights humanity can achieve in terms of governance, engineering, cultural synthesis, and military might, but also a stark reminder of the inherent challenges and complexities involved in maintaining power over vast territories and integrating truly diverse peoples for centuries. It reminds us that even the mightiest, most seemingly eternal empires are ultimately subject to the inexorable tides of history, but that their profound echoes, their fundamental contributions, can shape the world for millennia to come, truly making Rome the eternal city.